billionaire left his wife behind, chasing luxury and ambition with no regrets. But while he basked in wealth, she quietly built something of her own. Now fate brings them face to face once more. But with the powers shifted. What happens when the tables finally turn? The ocean breeze whispered through the open arches of the cliffside mansion, carrying the scent of salt, citrus blossoms, and marble polish through every corridor of the vast Santorini estate. Outside, sunlight glittered across the edge of the infinity pool that overlooked the cobalt Aegean, while inside, the hush of privilege hummed, crystal flutes chimed, linen curtains billowed softly, and the cool limestone floors soothed bare feet like ancient stone. Every inch of the space radiated affluence, the kind that bought not just property, but the silence and reverence of the world around it. Nathaniel Whitaker lounged across the velvet sectional, his skin sun-warmed from yachting afternoons and helipad arrivals, his ivory shirt unbuttoned just enough to reveal the subtle glint of a gold chain resting against his chest. He gently swirled the deep amber liquor in his tumbler, an aged Scotch from the Highlands, sharp and soothing in equal measure. He liked the way it burned going down. It reminded him he was still the one calling the shots. The Rolex on his wrist caught the golden daylight seeping through the glass facade as he leaned back with a measured sigh. This was his domain: ease, dominance, control. "Did you check the forecast, Nathaniel?" Her voice reached him like a purr, veiled in steel. He glanced up. Camille stood by the terrace doors, one hand resting against her hip while the other scrolled through her phone. She wore a backless cream wrap dress, the kind that slid effortlessly over skin and turned every step into a slow unveiling. Her chestnut hair tumbled down her back, catching the sun in burnished ribbons. He grinned, all confidence and indulgence. "Why would I? I've got a whole team for that." She rolled her eyes, her lips lifting in a smirk stained coral red. "Because, darling, if there's a wind surge tomorrow, we'll have to cancel the rooftop dinner. And wouldn't that be a tragedy?" "For you, maybe," Nathaniel replied, placing his glass on the mosaic side table. "For me, it's just another date I don't remember agreeing to." He didn't intend the words to wound, but a hint of indifference laced his tone, a chill Camille had grown familiar with over time. She didn't seem to mind. She hadn't come for affection. She came for the proximity to influence, the power that came with being tethered, however loosely, to a man who could have cities shift for him if he willed it. As she moved toward him, silent and sinuous, her phone buzzed. A glance, a frown, a flick of her finger. Just a work ping. Irrelevant. Nathaniel reached out, drawing her down beside him. His fingers swept through her hair, slow and practiced. "You stress too much," he murmured. "Let it go. We're in retreat mode." She laughed, nestling closer. "I learned from the best, remember?" "That you did," he said, though his gaze was already drifting. Past the pool, past the horizon. Toward something far beyond the cliffs and sea and surface calm. For a moment, just one flicker, and unease stirred in his chest. The kind that whispered, "If everything is perfect, why does it feel hollow?" The silence here wasn't peace, it was absence. A vacuum that reminded him how success could be deafeningly quiet. This hideaway was meant to soothe that voice, but stillness never sat well with him. This retreat was meant to offer a pause from it all. But pauses only made him uneasy. His phone buzzed on the hand-carved mosaic coffee table. He reached for it without thinking, expecting a calendar ping from his assistant about an upcoming investor call. Instead, the notification that appeared stopped him cold. Missed payment notice. Joint asset under investment. Nathaniel's brows furrowed as he opened the email. The property was still under Camille's name. It had fallen behind on payments. The words didn't compute. They belonged to someone else's problem, not his. For years, financial hardship hadn't existed in his world. What had she done to let this happen? "Everything okay?" Camille asked, her voice casual but edged with curiosity. He quickly locked the screen and glanced at her with a practiced grin. Nothing important. But it was, and it wasn't like Camille to mess up. She was always precise, obsessively so, handling the tiny financial details he never had the patience for. They had once built the foundation of his empire together. Her analytical brilliance, his charisma, their combined drive. But that was a lifetime ago, before he'd outgrown her grounded ways. Now she was little more than a name on outdated contracts, managing the leftover scraps he no longer cared about. Still, a flicker of guilt pinched his gut. Not for the missed payment, but for how easily he had erased her from his present. She wasn't supposed to falter. Not her. He exhaled and pushed the thought aside. She'd figure it out. She always did. "Let's talk about something more exciting," he said, turning back to Camille. "Like what you're planning to wear to tomorrow's rooftop soiree, assuming it doesn't get wiped out by ocean winds." Her laughter lifted through the villa, carefree, light. For a moment, he let himself sink into it. Across the sea, Camille Whitaker sat hunched at the kitchen table of her modest flat in Venice, surrounded by unpaid bills and a chipped ceramic mug gone cold hours ago. The low hum of the ancient refrigerator offered the only sound in the dim, narrow room, a dull echo of the heaviness pressing on her chest. She rubbed her temple, fingers threading through her chestnut-brown hair now streaked with strands of silver that had appeared too soon, too suddenly. Her eyes, once sharpened by instinct and ambition, looked exhausted, dimmed by the weight of surviving quietly. She picked up the bank letter again, even though she already knew what it said. Final notice of delinquency. Her fingers tightened around the paper, then slowly set it down, careful as if it might scald her. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had once been the woman who balanced million-euro portfolios without blinking, who could smell a bad investment before others even checked the books. Now, without Nathaniel, the fractures had begun to show. And beneath the financial mess was something deeper. Shame. The kind that crept in late at night and whispered, "You were once unstoppable." What happened? Her phone buzzed on the countertop. She reached for it automatically. The name on the screen made her hesitate. Dominic Hale. An old friend, a mentor, one of the few people who'd believed in her before she ever became Mrs. Whitaker. Her pulse quickened as she answered. "Dominic." "Camille," he said, his voice warm, steady, reassuring. "I was just thinking about you today. Wanted to see how you're doing." She bit her lip, holding her voice firm. "I'm managing." "I heard about Nathaniel's latest acquisition," he said cautiously, as if testing the waters. Her grip on the phone tightened. "I'm not part of that anymore." "I know," Dominic said gently, "but that doesn't mean you've stopped paying attention." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "Old habits." "Listen," he continued, "if you ever want to step back into the game, there's a project I'm developing. I could use someone with your experience. It's small for now, but I've got a feeling it'll grow." Isabel's breath caught slightly. For the first time in months, she felt something other than dread. A flicker of hope, of possibility. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice steadier than it had been in weeks. As she hung up, the weight on her chest eased just a bit. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid to find out. Outside, rain began to fall in a gentle hush, washing over the city like a quiet promise of renewal. Back at the estate, Logan remained unaware of Isabel's quiet return to herself. He checked his phone again. Another notification flashed across the screen. Missed payment, joint property account. This time, he didn't swipe it away. But the consequences of ignoring it for so long had already begun to take shape. If you were Isabel, would you accept Logan's offer, or make him watch as you rise without him? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories that surprise and empower. Isabel Wyatt stood by the window of her two-bedroom apartment, the dim morning light casting soft shadows along the faded wallpaper. Outside, the city stirred. Buses roared to life, footsteps shuffled across damp sidewalks, and distant car horns pierced the cold air. From her window, she could see the corner bakery glowing warm and golden, welcoming in early risers. The smell of fresh bread should have brought her comfort, but it didn't reach her window today. Nothing did, except the mounting weight of her worries. Behind her, the room was still. The radiator hummed softly. The mismatched pillows, the family photos clinging to the walls, once symbols of warmth, now felt like ghosts of what had been. Her gaze settled on a photograph from their honeymoon in Venice. Logan's arm wrapped around her waist, both of them smiling with the kind of joy that comes from a shared dream. How long ago had that been? It felt like a different life. She looked away, refusing to fall into nostalgia. That Isabel, the hopeful one, had vanished the moment Logan chose power over partnership. She had spent years pretending their marriage was still equal, silently picking up the pieces as he chased billion-dollar contracts and younger company. But now the pieces were too broken to fix. The bills crowding the kitchen counter were proof of it. She crossed the room, her slippers muffled against the worn hardwood floor, and sat at the small table where her coffee had long gone cold. The surface was cluttered with overdue notices, creditor letters, and reminders that her name was still tied to investments Logan no longer acknowledged. Her fingers trembled as she sifted through the envelopes, each one pressing harder into her chest than the last. Her phone buzzed. Meeting with bank rep, 10 a.m. She sighed, dragging a hand through her shoulder-length brown hair. She had no intention of going. What was the point? She already knew what they'd say. Time was up, and so was the bank's patience. Then another buzz, this time a message. James Everett, don't cancel. We need to talk after. Trust me. She let out a sharp exhale. James had always been persistent. Even back in college, he was the one pushing her to apply for internships, competitions, reminding her she was capable of more. Back then, she was unstoppable. She had plans, drive, no fear of failure. But life had a way of chipping away at that, especially when you spent years being dismissed by the person who once admired your strength the most. With a resigned sigh, she stood. She grabbed her coat and stepped outside. The bank was just as sterile and suffocating as Camille remembered. Cold marble floors, the sharp scent of freshly printed paper, and the faint scratching of pens on forms. She sat across from the representative, a man in his mid-30s with a polished demeanor and a sympathetic expression that didn't quite land. His glasses caught the overhead light as he tapped his pen against the desk, a nervous tick that grated on her more than it should have. "I'm afraid we've reached the point where we need a firm decision," he said, sliding a document toward her. "We've granted multiple extensions, but without a payment plan or additional collateral, the property will be repossessed by the end of the quarter." Camille's heart sank, but her face remained composed. She'd learned long ago that showing weakness in moments like this only handed people leverage. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice even despite the storm rising inside her. "Is there any room for negotiation?" The man shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitaker, our policies don't apologize," she cut in, leaning forward slightly. "Just tell me what my options are." He hesitated, then replied, "If you can secure a co-signer with significant assets or provide verifiable proof of future income, we could revisit the terms. But given the current financials—" "Thank you," she said abruptly, cutting him off. "I'll see what I can do." She stood up slowly, aware of how her legs felt heavier than usual, as if they carried the weight of every decision she'd once made with confidence but now questioned. Her hand brushed the edge of the desk, and for a split second, she wished she could lean on it, just to steady herself. But pride kept her upright. Always pride. As she walked toward the exit, her throat tightened. She could feel the sting at the corners of her eyes, the kind of sting that comes when you've held everything in for too long. Not here, she told herself. Not in front of them. But the weight of disappointment had settled into her chest like lead. It wasn't just about money. It was the realization that the safety she thought she'd built had quietly slipped away when she wasn't looking. The meeting ended with strained smiles and a handshake, but Camille's mind was already spinning as she stepped back out into the crisp morning air. She pulled out her phone and immediately called Dominic. "Camille," he answered on the second ring, his voice warm, reassuring. "How did it go?" "Exactly how I expected," she said, tightening the scarf around her neck. "They're not budging." "Then we need to talk," Dominic replied firmly. "Can you meet me at Hale & Co. in an hour?" She hesitated. It had been years since she'd stepped into any office that didn't have Nathaniel's name etched on the door. And beneath the hesitation, something more painful flickered. A quiet fear she barely acknowledged. What if no one took her seriously without his name attached to hers? What if she'd become invisible in the rooms she used to command? And for a fleeting moment, she wondered if she even belonged in rooms like that anymore. But then something settled in her, something small but fierce. She wasn't walking in for validation, she was walking in for herself. Dominic wasn't offering pity, he was offering her a way forward. And for once, she didn't want to say no. "I'll be there," she said, and hung up. Hale & Co. occupied the top floor of a sleek glass tower overlooking the Florence skyline. Camille's heels clicked steadily against the marble as she made her way to the conference room, where Dominic stood by the window. His silhouette was framed against a backdrop of stone domes and Renaissance rooftops. He turned as soon as he heard her. His blue eyes crinkled with warmth. "Camille," he said, extending a hand. "It's good to see you." She gave a faint smile, shaking his hand before settling into the seat across from him. "Thanks for making time." "For you, always," James said, settling across from her. "I've been keeping an eye on what's going on with Logan's company." Isabel stiffened slightly but gave a small nod. "I'm not involved in that anymore." "I know," James said, "but I also know you haven't lost your instincts. And right now I need someone with your vision." He slid a folder across the table. Its weight felt heavier than it looked. Isabel opened it slowly. Inside were detailed plans for a new venture, one centered around microfinancing for women entrepreneurs. It was bold, ambitious, the exact kind of project that used to ignite something deep inside her. "I've been working on this for a while," James explained, "but I need someone who can shape it, expand it. Someone who understands both the financial and emotional sides of these investments." Isabel traced the edge of the folder as her eyes scanned the pages. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Because you're the best," James answered without hesitation. "And because I know you've got something to prove. Not to Logan, but to yourself." Her throat tightened, but she nodded. "I don't have much to lose." "No," James said, leaning in, "but you've got everything to gain." The weight in her chest lifted, just a little, replaced by something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. She closed the folder and met his gaze. "Let's do this." That evening, back in her apartment, Isabel sat at the kitchen table, her mind buzzing. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what lay in front of her. She'd been ignored, dismissed, underestimated. But not anymore. As she sipped her tea, her phone buzzed again. "Logan West. Can we talk tomorrow about the property?" She stared at the message for a moment, then turned the phone face down. She had her own priorities now, and Logan wasn't one of them. Isabel opened her laptop and began typing the first draft of a business plan, one that just might rival Logan's empire. The sleek, reflective tower of West Global pierced the skyline like a modern-day monument to power. Its glass panels shimmered under the pale morning sun. From the outside, the headquarters looked untouchable. Inside, cracks had begun to form. Logan West strode through the marble executive lobby. His footfalls echoed through the grand hall. His navy blue suit was custom-tailored, his cologne expensive, his demeanor sharp. But today there was tension in the set of his shoulders, a stiffness in his stride. "Good morning, Mr. West," the receptionist said with a rehearsed smile. He gave a distracted nod and stepped into the private elevator. The ride to the top was silent, the hum of the machinery the only sound. When the doors opened, he stepped into the executive suite, a space that was equal parts luxury and precision. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city, but Logan didn't look. His thoughts were elsewhere. "Serena," he called. Serena Blake, his executive assistant, and more recently his lover, was already seated at the long glass table, fingers flying across her laptop. She looked up, her dark hair tumbling over her shoulder. "Morning," she said, flashing a polished smile. "I've prepped the materials for the acquisition meeting. Everything's on track." "Good," Logan muttered, loosening his tie as he dropped into the chair across from her. "How are the projections?" "Strong, on paper," Serena replied, spinning the laptop around so he could see. "Charts, forecasts, market growth trajectories, all pointing toward one conclusion. This acquisition was critical. Without it, West Global's growth would flatline. The board would not be pleased. But I have to warn you," she added, voice dipping slightly. "There's some chatter among the investors. They're nervous about the market." "Volatility," Nathaniel muttered, frowning as he tapped his fingers against the armrest. "Let them worry. That's what they pay us for, to manage risk. As long as we stay the course, we'll be fine." "Still." Camille leaned in slightly, her voice softening. "It wouldn't hurt to show them we've got contingencies in place, just to keep them calm." Nathaniel exhaled, dragging a hand through his dark hair. Camille was sharp, no question. She had a sixth sense for identifying weak spots before they showed up on the spreadsheets. That's what made her so valuable, beyond the obvious. But this deal wasn't one he could afford to second-guess. It had taken months of maneuvering to get to this point, and any sign of hesitation would smell like weakness. "I'll handle the board," he said firmly, closing the laptop. "We've come too far to flinch now." Before Camille could reply, Nathaniel's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. Elliot Grant, his CFO. "Urgent, need to talk." Competitor interference. Before the meeting, Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Competition wasn't unusual, but the timing? Disastrous. He called immediately. "Nathaniel," Elliot answered briskly. "We've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" Nathaniel asked, already bracing himself. "Another firm is targeting our high-value clients. 3 of them are holding off on signing renewals. Yet they're entertaining offers from someone else." Nathaniel's grip on the phone tightened. "Which firm?" Elliot hesitated. "It's a newer player, small but fast-moving. They've been flying under the radar, but now they're landing mid-tier contracts. They're ramping up, fast." Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, his mind scanning every name, every new entry in the sector. He prided himself on knowing every player in the game, but this didn't fit any known profile. "Do we know who's behind it?" "Not yet," Elliot admitted, "but we're digging. I'll have more before the meeting." "Good," Nathaniel said, ending the call. He sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the information. A small, aggressive firm making surgical moves. His temples throbbed with a pressure he hadn't felt in years. The kind that whispered, "You're not untouchable. Not anymore." For a man who built his life on control, the mere suggestion of chaos felt like standing too close to a cliff's edge. This wasn't chance. Someone had a plan, and they were executing it quietly enough to slip through the cracks. "What is it?" Camille asked, watching him closely. "Potential competitor. Poaching clients," Nathaniel muttered. "I need you to work with Elliot, pull a full report, strategy, approach, patterns, everything." Camille was already typing. "Do you think it's one of the usual suspects?" "No," Nathaniel said, his voice tightening. "Whoever this is, they're new, and they know exactly where to strike." By noon, Nathaniel was in the conference room, flanked by his senior leadership team. The long table was buried in financial reports, trend forecasts, and investor summaries. But the mood was taut. Elliot stood at the front of the room, clicking through a presentation. "The firm's name is Nova Helix," he said. "They've been operating in stealth mode for about a year, but in the last 3 months, they've signed with several mid-size accounts, and now they're targeting bigger fish." He clicked to the next slide. "They've already made a move on 3 of our clients." Nathaniel narrowed his eyes, studying the data, trying to connect the dots. Nova Helix wasn't just another startup. Their timing was calculated. Their strategy, too precise. Someone with experience was behind it. Their strategy was too precise. Their timing, too calculated. Someone with serious experience was behind this. "Do we have a lead on their CEO?" Nathaniel asked. Elliot nodded. "We're still confirming, but it appears to be Dominic Hale." Nathaniel froze. The name triggered a flood of memories. Dominic had been a familiar figure during the early days of his career, a mentor to Camille, back when she was the sharp financial brain behind everything they built. But why would Dominic be targeting him now? And then it hit him. Camille. He hadn't considered her a serious contender in years. But if she was involved with Nova Helix, then this wasn't just business, it was personal. "Nathaniel?" Camille's voice snapped him back. "Do you know him?" she asked, watching him closely. "Barely," he lied, pushing down the tightening in his chest. But if Dominic was working with Camille, then they had definitely underestimated them. The room went quiet. Elliot cleared his throat. "So, what's the plan?" Nathaniel leaned forward, lacing his fingers together as he considered their next move. "We hit back," he said finally. "Double down on the acquisition. If we secure this deal, we'll have the leverage to choke off Nova Helix's expansion." "And Camille?" she asked, her tone measured. Nathaniel paused. The idea of confronting Camille in a boardroom stirred something uncomfortable. He had dismissed her for so long that it felt almost surreal to picture her on the offensive. But the evidence was right in front of him. Ignoring it now would be a mistake. "I'll deal with Camille," he said coldly. "She doesn't know what she's stepped into." But even as he said it, doubt pricked at the edge of his thoughts. There had always been a quiet intensity in Camille, a methodical fire she kept hidden beneath calm calculation. He remembered it now, too late to unsee. As the meeting broke and the leadership team filed out, a single thought lingered in the back of his mind. What if she does know? What if this wasn't spontaneous? What if she'd been planning this for years? He pushed the thought aside and headed back to his office. The game had changed, but Nathaniel Whitaker wasn't planning to lose. Not to Camille. Not to anyone. As Nathaniel flipped through Nova Helix's financial documents, his phone buzzed with a new notification. An upcoming industry summit. Nova Helix was listed as a featured guest and leading the keynote presentation, Camille Whitaker. Camille sat in the back seat of the black sedan, her fingers gripping a sleek leather-bound folder resting in her lap. The steady hum of tires against pavement did little to calm the storm swirling inside her. The past few days had been a blur of midnight calls, urgent strategy sessions, and carefully crafted emails. Outside the window, the city's financial district flashed by, glass towers casting sharp shadows over crowded streets. But Camille no longer felt intimidated by the skyline. She'd once looked up at these towers with awe, as if only men like Nathaniel could sit at the top. Now she saw them as glass shells, transparent, breakable, no longer above her. As the car slowed in front of a modern, glass-walled office building, she inhaled deeply and smoothed the fabric of her navy blazer. She reached up and adjusted the gold pendant resting against her collarbone, a simple but meaningful gift from Dominic Hale. When Camille first joined Dominic's project, it wasn't flashy, but its simplicity reminded her of where she came from. She wasn't there to flaunt wealth. She was there to take control. The driver stepped out and opened her door. Her heels clicked confidently against the polished stone as she entered the building. The scent of fresh espresso mixed with the subtle aroma of new leather filled the lobby, grounding her. Each step measured, each breath intentional. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind, but now as it unfolded in real time, adrenaline surged beneath her skin. The elevator ride to the 15th floor was silent. Her reflection stared back at her in the mirrored walls. Dark brown hair pinned neatly, eyes sharp and focused, a quiet resolve in the angle of her chin. She wasn't the same woman who once stood in Nathaniel Whitaker's shadow. That version of Camille was gone. In her place stood someone who had fought to reclaim her name, her purpose, and her voice. Still, beneath the steel in her eyes, there was a flicker of something raw. Doubt. It came in quiet waves, uninvited, unwelcome. Could she truly measure up without him? Could the room take her seriously when her last name was no longer tied to his empire? It didn't show in her face, but it pulsed faintly in her chest, where the scars of the past hadn't fully closed. She reminded herself with every heartbeat, "You're not proving yourself to them. You already belong here. This time, they'll listen because you earned it." When the elevator chimed open, she stepped into the sleek conference room where Dominic and a small group of investors were already gathered. Sunlight poured in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, gilding the polished wood table in gold. The low murmur of quiet conversation faded as every head turned toward her. Dominic stood smiling warmly and extended his hand. "Camille, right on time." She shook his hand firmly, the gesture full of quiet understanding. "I wouldn't miss it," she said. Her voice was steady as she took her seat. She scanned the table quickly, noting the key figures. Helena Shaw, a venture capitalist known for her no-nonsense style. Marcus Bell, a bold tech entrepreneur with a flair for disruptive innovation. Tom Kwan, a sharp financial strategist known for seeing patterns others missed. These weren't just investors, they were gatekeepers to the highest levels of the industry. Dominic opened the meeting with a concise introduction, setting the stakes and spotlighting the project's ambition. But Camille knew this wasn't about spreadsheets or valuation models. It was about vision. She waited patiently, letting Dominic finish laying the groundwork. Her fingers lightly touched the edge of her folder. Then Dominic turned to her with a nod. "I'd like to introduce Camille Whitaker, our strategic lead. She's been instrumental in refining our approach and positioning us for sustainable growth." "Camille, the floor is yours." She stood. The room quieted. She stepped forward and placed the folder on the table, projecting the first slide onto the screen behind her. But she didn't dive into charts right away. Instead, she paused and met the eyes of each investor, one by one, building quiet connection. "I know what you're thinking," she began, her tone calm but confident. "Why trust a startup to do what bigger firms haven't? Why take the risk when there are safer bets?" A few investors shifted in their seats, clearly intrigued. "The answer," she continued, "is because we're not chasing short-term returns. We're targeting an underserved market, women entrepreneurs, who've been sidelined by outdated systems, and we're doing it with precision, scale, and a deep understanding of the financial landscape." She clicked to the next slide, revealing a graph showing the exponential rise of female-led businesses over the past 10 years. "This market isn't just growing," she said. "It's thriving, but the institutions meant to support it haven't adapted. They see it as niche. We see it as a missed opportunity." As she moved between slides, her voice didn't just present facts, it carried conviction. Each word was wrapped in experience, in scars earned, in the lessons of being underestimated. And even now, as the words flowed with clarity, a part of her still braced for doubt, for the moment someone would question her authority. But no one did. As she moved deeper into the presentation, Camille's presence filled the room, her voice steady, her message crystal clear. She addressed the inefficiencies in current lending models. She broke down the gaps, and she offered solutions, grounded in tech, scalability, and empathy. But she didn't rely solely on numbers. She shared stories, real women with real businesses, denied funding not because they lacked vision, but because traditional systems failed to see their worth. She didn't just pitch data, she painted a future, what success could look like if they dared to think differently. By the time Isabel reached the final slide, the room was silent. She closed her presentation and turned to face the table. "We're not just asking for your investment," she said, calm but firm. "We're inviting you to join a movement, one that redefines financial inclusion. Together, we can build something that not only generates returns, but leaves a legacy." For a moment, no one spoke. Isabel could feel her pulse pounding, but on the outside, she remained poised. Helena Shaw was the first to break the silence. She leaned back in her chair, tapping a manicured nail on the table. "Impressive," she said, her eyes sharp. "But how do you plan to go up against established players, with deeper pockets and more reach?" Isabel answered without hesitation. "We're not going head-to-head. We're targeting a segment they've ignored. Our size gives us speed. We can adapt. We can personalize. Big firms can't match that agility. And with your backing," she added, "we can scale, without sacrificing what makes us unique." Marcus Bell nodded slowly. "And contingency plans?" he asked. "If the market shifts unexpectedly?" Isabel smiled slightly. She'd expected that. "Our model has layered safeguards," she said. "Diversified portfolios, flexible partnerships, adaptive tech. And we don't just respond to market trends, we anticipate them." Tom Kwan leaned forward, a hint of a smile forming. "You've done your homework," he said. "I like that." James took the cue, sensing the momentum. "Isabel has been essential," he added. "This foundation is more than strong, it's future-ready. With your support, we can scale impact alongside profitability." After a few more back and forths, the investors glanced among themselves, a silent conversation unfolding. Helena finally spoke. "I'm in," she said, firm and direct, "but I want quarterly reports and a seat at the table for key decisions." Marcus and Tom followed, each with terms of their own. Relief washed over Isabel like sunlight, but she stayed composed, thanking them graciously and outlining the next steps. As the meeting wrapped, James pulled her aside. "You did it," he said, pride unmistakable in his voice. "We did it," Isabel corrected, though deep down she knew this moment was hers. Outside, the crisp afternoon air filled her lungs as she stepped into the sunlight. And for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. The doubts? Gone. In their place, a fierce, steady sense of purpose. Her phone buzzed as she climbed into the car. "See you at the industry event. Let's talk." "Logan," she smiled. But not the smile of someone intimidated. This time, she was ready. Inside Logan West's office, the air was thick, too still, like the moments before a storm breaks. The blinds were half-drawn, streaking shadows across his polished mahogany desk. He sat motionless, eyes fixed on the flickering glow of his laptop. His tie was loosened, his collar unbuttoned. But the small gesture brought no relief. The pressure in his chest only grew. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the desk, a habit he hadn't indulged in since the early days of building Whitaker Holdings from scratch. Back then, he thrived under pressure. But this was different. The figures on screen told a story he wasn't ready to hear. Quarterly projections were down 15%. Key contracts stalled, investor confidence slipping. Even the acquisition he'd poured months into, once a guaranteed win, was starting to unravel. Nathaniel Whitaker's empire, once commanding and resilient, was beginning to show cracks. The whispers in the boardroom weren't whispers anymore. He leaned back, exhaled sharply. He had spent decades chasing market dominance, fueled by bold risks and brutal discipline. But somewhere along the way, he had stopped paying attention to the fine print. The little cracks had widened, quietly, persistently, and now they threatened to break the whole structure apart. And now, Camille's name was back in the air, a ghost from a chapter he thought long closed, a ghost, now leading the very threat shaking his walls. His phone buzzed harshly against the wood. Adrian Monroe, his CFO. Nathaniel picked up. "Talk to me." "We've got a situation," Elliot said without hesitation. 3 more clients just pulled out. They're going to Nova Helix." Nathaniel's grip tightened. 3 more? "Yes," Elliot confirmed. "And it's not just them. 2 board members called me this morning. They want to know what our response is." Nathaniel stood, pacing toward the window. The skyline used to be a monument to his ambition. Now it looked back at him with silent judgment. "We're not losing more," he said flatly. "I'll handle it." Elliot hesitated. "Nathaniel, if we don't move fast, this could snowball. Nova Helix isn't just winning clients, they're making us look outdated." He clenched his jaw. Camille's name in Elliot's mouth felt like salt in an old wound. She was supposed to fade. Instead, she'd evolved, quietly, smartly, and now everything he'd ignored was crashing in. "We're not outdated," he snapped. "They're exploiting momentary instability." "Maybe," Elliot replied carefully. "But temporary or not, the perception is changing, and perception drives decisions." Nathaniel ended the call without replying. He tossed the phone on the couch and rubbed his temples. Camille Whitaker had been quiet for years, living in the margins while he made headlines. But now, she wasn't storming the gates. She was pulling out the foundation, one deal at a time. The knock on his door broke the silence. Amelia stepped in, expression composed but eyes flickering with concern. "I thought you'd want to see this," she said, handing him a tablet. Nathaniel scanned the headline across the screen. Nova Helix, the rising star redefining financial services. Below it, a photo of Camille standing tall behind a podium. Composed, sharp, a quiet force. "She's gaining traction," Amelia said, taking a seat. "And not just with clients. Investors are starting to align with her vision. It's no longer just about who can outspend the other. It's about positioning." Nathaniel set the tablet down slowly. He stared at her image, so assured, so unshakable, and something inside him cracked in silence. "She built it all, and I didn't see it coming." Amelia crossed her legs, tapping her fingers against the chair's armrest. "She's had time. Years, actually. And now she's using everything she learned from you and turning it into her own strategy." The words stung more than Nathaniel wanted to admit. He had always known Camille was brilliant. Her sharp instincts and unmatched precision had been a key part of his early rise. But he had assumed that brilliance had faded, drowned in the routine of domestic life and the slow unraveling of their marriage. He'd been wrong. Camille's brilliance hadn't faded. It had just found a new direction, and that direction was aimed straight at him. "What's the plan?" Amelia asked, pulling him back to the moment. Nathaniel stood, buttoning his jacket with cold precision. "We go on the offensive. I want a full list of our most vulnerable clients by the end of the day," he continued. "We'll offer incentives to keep them, reduced rates, tailored contracts, whatever it takes." "And Camille?" Amelia raised an eyebrow. "I'll handle her personally," Nathaniel said, his tone sharp and final. "She wants to play in my world? Fine. But she has no idea what it's like when I give something my full attention." By evening, Nathaniel was back in his penthouse, a glass of bourbon in hand, eyes fixed on the screen. The list Amelia had compiled stared back at him, names of clients who had already jumped ship. Each name burned into his memory like a scar. He prided himself on client loyalty. Long-term relationships had always been the foundation of his empire. But Camille had found the cracks. She had used her insider knowledge of his team, his tactics, his blind spots, and weaponized it with surgical precision. The room was dim, lit only by the soft gleam of city lights filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. Shadows stretched across the walls, echoing the weight pressing on Nathaniel's chest. He had always been the one in control. But now, for the first time, he was reacting instead of leading. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "See you at the event tomorrow. Let's see what you've got. See." He read it again, slowly. Camille was challenging him, and it ignited something in his chest. A sharp mix of anger and respect. A rivalry only possible between two people who had once built something together. If she wanted a battle, she'd get one. But he wasn't just defending his company. He was going to take back what he built. What was his? The next morning, the industry event buzzed with energy. Executives mingled over glasses of champagne, soft jazz floating through the luxurious venue, with its gold accents, marble floors, and sparkling chandeliers. Nathaniel entered the grand hall with deliberate steps, scanning the crowd. And then he saw her. Camille, standing tall in a sleek black dress that demanded attention without trying. Her posture was poised, her voice confident. A subtle laugh slipped past her lips, and it hit him like déjà vu. She stood in a circle of powerful investors, and she owned the space. This wasn't the Camille from his past. She was stronger, sharper, certain of her worth. She wasn't rising. She had already arrived. And for a fleeting second, Nathaniel felt something unexpected. Pride. But it was gone as quickly as it came, drowned by the sharp truth. She wasn't standing by his side anymore. She was standing across from him. He made his way toward her, his presence drawing a few curious glances. When their eyes met, Camille's smile didn't waver. If anything, it grew a touch more pronounced, as if she had expected this moment all along. "Nathaniel," she said, her tone warm and composed. "I was wondering when you'd show up." He stopped just in front of her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes fixed firmly on hers. "We need to talk," he said. "Of course," she replied, offering a polite nod to the group around her before stepping away. "Shall we find somewhere private?" As they walked toward a quieter corner of the venue, Nathaniel couldn't ignore the shift in dynamic. Camille wasn't the woman she used to be, waiting, hesitant, cautious. She was setting the pace now. They took seats in a private lounge. Camille leaned in slightly, her voice low but unwavering. "Let's be clear, Nathaniel. This isn't a reunion. It's a negotiation." For a moment, Nathaniel said nothing. Her words struck something in him. Camille wasn't playing his game anymore. She had crafted a new one, and he was just now realizing the rules had changed. There was no hesitation in her tone, no apology in her presence. The woman across from him had outgrown the shadows he left behind. And yet, as she sat across from him, something inside her flickered, a trace of fear she didn't want to name. Not fear of him, but fear of losing herself in this moment. He had once known her so intimately, had seen her in her most vulnerable seasons. Could he still read her now? Could he see past the new armor she'd spent years building? That invisible tension tightened just beneath her poised exterior. But she wouldn't let it surface. Not here. Not now. The city pulsed with light beneath the early night sky, a vast canvas of ambition and power. From the corner office at Horizon Dynamics, Camille stood at the window, one hand brushing against the glass, eyes fixed on the familiar skyline. She used to view it as Nathaniel's territory. But tonight, it looked different. The towers, the traffic, the glowing high-rises, they didn't symbolize his dominance anymore. They represented her own place in this world. Behind her, the office moved with calm momentum. Phones ringing softly, quiet footsteps echoing across sleek floors, hushed voices discussing plans and progress. This wasn't the scrappy hustle of a new venture. It was the composed confidence of a company in its prime. And Camille had engineered every moment of that rise. She turned as James Donovan stepped in, a tablet in one hand and a cup of tea in the other. He placed them beside her and took a seat, stretching his legs. "You've been quiet since the event," he said, voice light but observant. Camille smiled faintly and took a slow sip of the tea. "Just thinking." "About Nathaniel?" he asked with a raised brow. Her silence gave him all the answer he needed. James chuckled, settling deeper into his chair. "I don't blame you. He didn't see this coming." Camille set the cup down and folded her hands. "He underestimated me," she said. no spite in her voice, just certainty. But this isn't about revenge. I'm not chasing some vindictive victory. I needed to prove I could stand on my own. Her voice softened, not from weakness but clarity. I had to rebuild what was lost, not just reputation, but faith in myself. Some days, she added after a pause, I still have to remind myself I deserve this, that I'm not just reacting to the past, I'm finally leading my future. James nodded slowly. Well, you've done far more than that. The deal with Langston Financial is nearly finalized. That opens the door to the international market. Camille nodded, eyes narrowing slightly in focus. Langston had always been one of Nathaniel's most dependable partners. Securing them wasn't just strategic, it was symbolic. But she wasn't here to dethrone anyone. She was here to build something enduring, something greater than a rivalry. And for the first time, it wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about finally doing what felt right. Have they agreed to the terms? Isabel asked, pulling the tablet toward her to scan the latest updates. They're on board, James confirmed. But we need you to lead the final negotiation. Langston's CEO respects you, but he'll want reassurances before he fully commits. Isabel tapped her fingers against the table, her mind already shaping the pitch she would deliver. Schedule the meeting for tomorrow, she said. Let's close this. The next morning, Isabel arrived at Langston Financial headquarters with the calm authority that had defined every milestone in her career. She wore a sharp charcoal gray pantsuit, tailored to precision, exuding confidence with every step. Her heels echoed lightly against the polished floors as she made her way toward the executive conference room where the Langston team awaited. The space was modern and open, glass walls offering sweeping views of the city skyline. David Langston, the company's CEO, rose as she entered. A dignified man with silver hair and an unspoken presence, he offered a firm handshake and a warm smile. Isabel, he said, it's good to see you again. Likewise, she replied, taking her seat at the sleek glass table. Thank you for making time. David gestured toward the documents in front of him. Your proposal is impressive, but I have a few questions before we move forward. Isabel leaned in slightly, her tone even and assured. I'd be happy to address them. What followed was a test of insight and poise. David's questions were meticulous, each one drilling into long-term risks, operational scalability, and potential disruptions. Isabel, prepared for every angle, delivered responses with composure, layering strategic insight with financial clarity and vision with realism. By the end of the meeting, David sat back and offered a slow, satisfied nod. I have to admit, he said, you've thought of everything. I've had strong mentors, Isabel replied, her mind flashing briefly to Logan back before their paths diverged. But more importantly, I believe in what we're building. David studied her for a long moment, then smiled. So do I. Let's make it official. Back at Horizon Dynamics, the celebration was subtle but deeply meaningful. The core team gathered in the main conference room, champagne glasses in hand. James lifted his glass with a smile. To Isabel, he said, his voice warm, and to a future built on vision, resilience, and hard work. Laughter and cheers followed as glasses clinked. Isabel smiled, soaking in the moment. This wasn't just a win, it was hers. This wasn't about defeating someone else, it was about rising in her own right. Later, as the others dispersed, she returned to her office. The city outside her window gleamed under a pale blue sky. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A message. Congratulations, I hear Langston is in good hands. Logan. Let's talk, Nathaniel. Her thumb hovered over the screen, but after a beat, Camille placed the phone face down on her desk. She wasn't ready, not yet. There were still pieces of the puzzle that needed to fall into place. The screen glowed softly in the darkening room, its light flickering like a question she wasn't ready to answer. She inhaled, slow and deliberate. Now wasn't the moment to waver. From the doorway, James appeared, leaning casually against the frame with a knowing smile. You're not going to respond? Not yet, Camille replied, rising and gathering her things. I have bigger things to focus on. The following week, Camille attended a high-profile financial summit where Horizon Dynamics had been invited to present as one of the fastest-growing firms in the industry. The event took place at an upscale hotel ballroom, its grand chandeliers casting golden reflections across marble floors. Executives, analysts, and investors mingled, their conversations filled with clinks of glassware and occasional bursts of laughter. Camille stood near the edge of the room, calmly observing the dynamics. She had always been a strategist, measuring the landscape before making her move. But tonight was different. She wasn't on the sidelines. She was center stage. "Impressive turnout," James said, joining her with a glass of wine in hand. "Indeed," Camille replied, eyes scanning the crowd. "It's the perfect opportunity to solidify our position." As she spoke, her gaze landed on Nathaniel Whitaker, who had just entered the ballroom. Dressed impeccably in a dark tailored suit, he moved with his usual elegance, but something had changed. His invincible aura had dimmed slightly, a subtle tension showing in his posture. Their eyes locked across the room. For a moment, time felt suspended. "He's coming over," James observed, taking a step back to give them space. "Good luck," he added with a small nod. Camille drew in a slow breath as Nathaniel approached. His expression was calm, but his eyes searched hers. "Camille," he said, voice warm but cautious, "we seem to keep running into each other." "Funny how that happens," she replied smoothly, her smile polite but distant. "Can we talk?" he asked, motioning toward a quieter corner of the room. After a short pause, she nodded. They walked together, the buzz of the crowd fading into the background as they stepped into a quieter seating area near the balcony. The night air flowed in gently through open doors, carrying with it the distant hum of the city. Nathaniel sat opposite her, his posture composed, gaze unwavering. "You've been busy," he said. "So have you," Camille answered, crossing her legs and leaning back slightly. "But I'm guessing this isn't a social call." "No," he admitted. "I want to congratulate you. Horizon Dynamics is making serious waves. The deal with Langston, that was a brilliant move." Camille tilted her head, studying him. "Thank you," she said. "But you didn't come over here just to compliment me, did you?" A soft chuckle escaped him as he ran a hand through his hair. "No, I didn't. I'm here because we're on a collision course, Camille, and we both know it." She didn't blink. "So what are you suggesting?" "A truce," Nathaniel said, voice lower now. "We don't have to go to war. We can find a way to coexist without tearing each other down." Camille considered his words carefully. The weight of their past, of betrayal, silence, and lost years, hung between them. But while his offer was reasonable, it didn't align with what she truly wanted. "I don't think you understand," she said, leaning in slightly. "I'm not interested in a truce, Nathaniel." A pause, then her voice turned sharp. "I'm interested in winning." The words fell between them like a stone in still water. Clear, unmoving, undeniable. There was no anger in her tone, just truth. Unapologetic, undeniable. Nathaniel's breath caught ever so slightly, but Camille remained still, composed. For the first time, the message was clear. This wasn't just business anymore. It was Camille Whitaker's moment to claim everything she had once been denied. As twilight spilled amber and lavender hues across the city skyline, Nathaniel Whitaker stood quietly on the balcony of his penthouse, his glass of bourbon warming in his hand. Below him, the city pulsed with life. Car horns blared, streetlights blinked on one by one, and faint conversations floated up from the streets. But tonight, all of it felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. He stood still, detached from the world that once revolved around him. The skyline, once a symbol of everything he conquered, now stretched before him like a silent witness to his undoing. The wind tousled his dark hair as he took a slow sip, savoring the sharp burn. He had lost count of how many evenings had passed like this, alone, haunted by reflection, unable to sleep. The empire he had built with such precision, once a towering symbol of control and prestige, was crumbling, and at the center of its unmaking was Camille. Horizon Dynamics wasn't just another competitor anymore. It was surpassing Whitaker Global, step by step, deal by deal. Her face haunted him, the last time he'd seen her at the summit. She had spoken with unwavering confidence, her voice calm, her message unmistakable. "I'm not interested in a truce, Nathaniel. I'm interested in winning." And she was winning. It wasn't just strategy, it was personal. She had cracked his armor with knowledge only someone who once believed in him could wield. His phone buzzed behind him on the patio table. He turned reluctantly, placing the glass down and picking up the phone. The name on the screen stopped him. Amelia Carter. He hesitated, then answered. "Amelia?" "Nathaniel," she said, her voice smooth but edged with urgency. "I just left the board meeting." He gripped the phone tighter. "I wasn't told there was a meeting tonight." "They didn't want you to be," she replied quietly. "That's why I'm calling. They're losing confidence. Fast." He closed his eyes. The words hit harder than expected, heavy in his chest. "What are they planning?" "Contingency measures," she said. "Replacing you as CEO, if things don't turn around." Nathaniel stepped back to the railing, the cool night air unable to cool the heat rising under his collar. "Let me guess," he said. "Trevor Lang is leading the charge?" There was a brief pause. "He's one of them, yes, but it's more than just him. External advisors are fueling it. Some believe Horizon is going to wipe us out unless we make a drastic move." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "And what about you? What do you think?" Another pause. Then her voice softened. "I think you're the only one who can fix this, but you're running out of time." He stared into the darkened horizon, Amelia's words echoing louder than the city's pulse. He exhaled hard, dragging a hand through his hair. "Thanks for telling me." "Don't thank me," she said. "Just do something." The call ended. Nathaniel lowered the phone to the railing and stared out over the city, his mind racing. He was losing the one thing he'd built his identity around. Camille wasn't just matching his game, she was outperforming him. Every tactic he tried seemed to crumble. Her strategies were too precise, too familiar. She knew him inside and out. And that was the irony. He had once dismissed her as too cautious, too reserved to lead. Now, she was the reason his empire trembled. And across town, in her own quiet apartment, Camille sat alone in the dark. The glow from the city lights cast faint patterns on the walls, but her eyes didn't move. She wasn't celebrating. She couldn't. Not yet. Winning looked different than she'd imagined. The silence pressed against her ribs. She reached for the same mug of cold tea she'd been holding for an hour. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the exhaustion that success rarely warns you about. She had everything she'd fought for, yet some nights she still questioned if it came at too high a cost. She had become everything he thought she couldn't be, without him. Earlier than usual, the Whitaker Global building was still quiet, the city only beginning to stir. Nathaniel Whitaker sat in his office, bathed in the soft morning sunlight that streamed through the tall windows, casting golden streaks across the sea of documents cluttered on his desk. Financial projections, client retention reports, and competitor analyses. Every page told the same story: decline. But one report stopped him cold. It was a detailed breakdown of Horizon Dynamics' latest acquisitions, including a small, specialized financial advisory firm that had once been a critical partner for Whitaker Global. Now it was part of Camille Whitaker's growing empire. She hadn't just built a rival company, she was systematically dismantling his from the inside out. She knew exactly where to hit. His fingers froze over the paper. For a moment, the air felt thinner. That firm had been one of the first he'd trusted, one of the building blocks of his rise, and now it was hers. Taken, like so many other things he thought were unshakable. A sharp knock on the door broke through a spiral. "Come in," Nathaniel called. Trevor Lang, his CFO, stepped inside. His posture was rigid, eyes guarded. The navy suit he wore was impeccable, but it did little to hide the tension written all over his face. "Got a minute?" Nathaniel gestured toward the chair opposite. "Let me guess, this is about the board." Trevor nodded as he sat. There spooked Nathaniel. 6 major clients lost in under a month. And Horizon Dynamics? They're moving fast. The board's starting to talk options, serious ones. Nathaniel leaned forward, jaw set. "Replacing me won't stop her. That damage is already done. And no one else in this chair knows where to strike back." Trevor's brow furrowed. "Then what is the plan?" The question hung in the air, heavier than it should have. For the first time in his career, Nathaniel didn't have a solid answer. But he wasn't about to show that. Not to Trevor, not to the board, not even to himself. "I'm meeting with Camille today," he said finally. Trevor raised a skeptical eyebrow. "You think she'll back off?" Nathaniel exhaled. "No, but I need to understand what her endgame is. If we're going to survive this, I need to know where she's heading." Trevor stood and straightened his tie. "Just don't wait too long. The board won't." As the door clicked shut, Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting to the clock. He had once believed Camille would always be in his shadow. Now she stood in front of him, fierce, focused, and utterly unyielding. She wasn't here to support his dreams anymore. She had her own. The restaurant was sleek and exclusive, the kind of place where high-stakes negotiations played out behind closed doors. Nathaniel arrived early, choosing a discreet corner booth in the back, far from curious eyes. He ordered a scotch and nursed it slowly, eyes on the entrance. The amber liquid did little to quiet the storm inside him. The man who once dictated the tempo of every room now waited, uncertain, defensive. It was a position he despised. When Camille Whitaker walked in, the energy in the room shifted. She wore a deep emerald dress, the rich color catching the light and amplifying the aura of poise and quiet command she carried. Her heels tapped softly against the marble floor, each step precise. Even before she reached him, he felt the difference. She wasn't returning to anything. She was arriving on her own terms. Nathaniel didn't move as she approached. "Nathaniel," she greeted, sliding smoothly into the booth across from him. "I wasn't sure you'd show," Nathaniel Whitaker said, his voice low. "I could say the same about you," Camille Whitaker replied, her tone measured as she slid into the booth across from him. He nodded to the waiter, who returned moments later with a glass of red wine. Camille accepted it, but didn't take a sip. "So," she said, eyes steady. "What's this about?" Nathaniel studied her. The way she held herself, confident, calm, untouchable, reminded him just how far she had come. "I want to know what you're after," he said at last. "Is this about revenge?" Camille tilted her head slightly, considering the question. "If it were," she said, "you'd already be out of business." "Then what is it?" She leaned forward, her voice soft but unwavering. "This is about building something of my own, something no one can dismiss, take credit for, or rip away." She paused, letting the words settle. "I spent years building your dream, Nathaniel. Now I'm building mine." Nathaniel swallowed hard. Her words hit deeper than he wanted to admit. "And there's no room for compromise?" he asked. "There was," Camille said, her gaze locked on his. "That door closed the day you chose someone else, someone with more shine, over the one who built the foundation." For a moment, the memory flashed, her quiet resilience during boardroom battles, the late nights spent solving problems no one else could see, her loyalty given without question. And how he had walked away from all of it. Nathaniel leaned back, the weight of her words sinking in like concrete. He had spent years chasing domination, believing success was about control. But now, staring at Camille, he saw a different kind of power, one that didn't need validation. She stood, smoothing the front of her dress. "I'll see you at the next board meeting," she said, her voice cool. "We'll let the numbers speak." Then she walked away, the click of her heels growing fainter with every step. Nathaniel remained seated, his scotch untouched. For the first time in his life, the silence around him wasn't strategic. It was hollow. Not the silence of contemplation, but the aftermath of misjudgment. He wasn't mourning a deal lost. He was mourning the woman he had underestimated and ultimately lost. His phone buzzed. "Trevor Lang. We need to talk. Urgent." But Nathaniel already knew. The conference room at Whitaker Global Headquarters was unnaturally quiet. Morning light streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the oak table. Nathaniel sat at the head, surrounded by board members, but the energy that once pulsed through this room was gone. All that remained was the weight of disappointment. Across from him, Trevor Lang flipped through financials. His expression was grave. "We're running out of options," Trevor said, finally breaking the silence. "Investor confidence is collapsing. Horizon Dynamics is bleeding us out." Nathaniel clenched his jaw. He had known this moment was coming, felt it building over weeks of missed targets and client losses. But still, it hit like a punch to the gut. "We have a proposal," Trevor continued, sliding a thick folder across the table. Nathaniel didn't touch it. He didn't need to. The word merger was stamped across the cover, with Horizon Dynamics. The room went still. Everyone knew what that meant. The terms wouldn't favor Whitaker Global. Camille had the upper hand. Momentum, public goodwill, market trust. She would dictate the terms. She already was. "This isn't just about saving face," Trevor added. "It's about aligning with the future. Camille's strategy is where the market's going, and honestly, Nathaniel, we need her." Nathaniel stared at the folder, but didn't move. He didn't need to read it to feel the loss. This wasn't just about a company. This was about watching the woman he once saw as an extension of himself rise into something far greater. It was about watching the woman he had once dismissed become the very force he couldn't stop. And now she held all the cards. He wasn't sure if he could swallow his pride and hand over control to Isabel, even if it meant saving everything he'd built. Before he could respond, the boardroom door opened, and Isabel Wyatt entered. Her presence was like a shift in pressure, calm but commanding. She wore a crisp white blouse under a tailored navy blazer, her hair pulled into a sleek bun that emphasized her confidence and clarity. Her heels clicked softly on the polished floor as she approached, offering a brief nod to the board. Her eyes met Logan's for a moment, unflinching, then moved on. "Isabel," Trevor Lang greeted, standing to shake her hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Of course," she replied, her voice smooth. Then she took the seat at the head of the table, Logan's seat. No one questioned it. She laid her folder on the table and opened it with practiced precision. "I've reviewed the merger proposal," she began, tone calm but firm. "And while consolidation is clearly the most logical way forward, there are a few terms I'd like to discuss." Logan leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're already making demands?" Isabel didn't flinch. "I'm negotiating," she corrected. "That's what we're here for, isn't it?" The board fell silent, watching as she outlined her terms. Her pitch was focused, highlighting mutual advantages, shared resources, market expansion. But her key condition was unmistakable. She would be CEO. Logan would transition into an advisory role. "That's non-negotiable," she said, closing her folder. "The market needs clarity. Stability won't come from holding on to the past." Logan's heart pounded, each beat louder than the last. "And if I don't agree?" he asked. Isabel tilted her head, just slightly. A flicker of sadness touched her expression. "Then the board will vote to remove you, and the merger will proceed without your input. I'm giving you the chance to choose your exit." Her tone wasn't cold, just resolute. She wasn't here for triumph. She was here to finish what she started. The room remained still. Silence expanded like a crack in a frozen lake. Logan's mind spun through memory. Their late nights, their ambition, the early promise they once shared. But the past had passed. And now, she was taking the future. "I need a moment," he said suddenly, rising and stepping out of the room before anyone could speak. He found himself alone on the rooftop terrace. Wind cut across the open air, tugging at his tie. The city pulsed beneath him, alive and unaware of the war he was losing. Or maybe had already lost. He didn't turn when he heard footsteps. "I figured you'd follow," he said quietly. "I needed to," Isabel replied, stopping behind him. "This isn't easy," he muttered. "For me either," she said softly. He scoffed, a bitter edge in his voice. "You're winning." "This isn't about winning, Logan," Isabel said, stepping beside him, her gaze fixed on the skyline. "It's about building something that's mine. I spent years inside your dream. Now I'm building mine." He turned to face her, pain raw in his eyes. "I never meant for it to end like this." "I know," she said. They stood in silence, the hum of the city in the distance. "I'll accept the terms," Logan said finally, the words heavy on his tongue. "Not because I want to, because I have to." "You're making the right choice." "Maybe, but it doesn't feel like it." She reached out, resting her hand on his arm. "You'll find your way, Logan, like I did." Then she turned, walking away, leaving him alone with the skyline and the weight of everything he'd lost. The merger was finalized the following week. Headlines filled the business world. Horizon Dynamics acquires Westcorp in landmark deal. Every article bore Isabel Wyatt's photo. She had become the face of resilience and transformation. Logan sat in his old office, soon to be vacated, watching the coverage. The room had been stripped of its legacy, the awards, the photos, the artifacts of his reign. He had taken the advisory role, but he knew it wouldn't last. Soon, he'd fade into the background, just like Isabel once had. As he closed the last box and carried it out, the sun spilled across his face. He paused, breathed. She had won, but maybe, just maybe, that wasn't the end of his story. In a high-corner office with the same view of the city, Isabel Wyatt stood by the window. She wasn't thinking about Logan. She was thinking about the future, one she had built on her terms. And she wasn't done yet. "So, the story has come to an end. And you, our A. If you've stayed with us all the way to this point, it probably means something in this story spoke to you. Maybe it stirred something quiet inside you. Maybe it reminded you of your own strength." Camille's story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about crushing the past. It was about reclaiming herself. She didn't need anyone's permission to rise. She just needed tufted. And maybe that's something why the Stoics have a quote that I keep close to my heart. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The impediment to action ad vaording." It means the obstacles you face are the very path forward. Camille faced doubt, betrayal, silence, but instead of letting those things define her, she let them sharpen her. She didn't escape. So if you've been told you're not enough, if you felt invisible, or if you've ever been quietly rebuilding yourself piece by piece, know that. And hey, if this story touched you in any way, like the video, share it with someone who might need this reminder, and don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us tell more stories like this, stories that hopefully stay with you. Thank you for being here.